If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, well, aging. In this episode, Corbin and I discuss alcohol and its effects on, well, aging.
Today is February 6th of 2022. That means just around the corner, next Sunday is going to be Super Bowl Sunday. And it got me thinking, what are one of the main commercials that you see during Super Bowl? Commercials towards adult beverages. And we kind of have a huge culture around consuming adult beverages. It's almost as it's a part of our lives. With the COVID pandemic, a lot of people have gone one of two ways. Obviously, we've talked on past podcasts that stress levels are really increased. Some people have adapted either alcohol or exercise in order to relieve some of that stress. And I just kind of wanted to talk about that. I think that's a really good subject for us to talk about. Alcohol versus exercise.
Sounds like a good topic.
Sounds like a good topic. I also think it's really interesting that there was a study that was done by Harvard University, and what they determined was individuals that actually exercise more, they tend to drink more. Let's talk about some of the risks that are involved with alcohol. Obviously, everyone knows that there's going to be liver issues, right? And the liver is a huge key point of breaking down everything that we eat in our body. It breaks it down and it throws it out into the bloodstream. But it's not necessarily the alcohol itself that is dangerous. It's what the alcohol gets broken down into. Because the liver ends up being in overdrive, this obviously affects our hormone levels, lowers vitamin D. Hops, if we're drinking beer, is a natural muscle relaxer, but it also has been demonstrated that hops actually can increase estrogen levels. It has been proven that alcohol, especially the more higher levels of alcohol, can prevent the production of HGH. It causes dehydration. It prevents your protein synthesis from occurring. It's extra calories. And the sad part is even though we drink in order to kind of relieve stress, alcohol is a depressant. And with it being a depressant, it can in return cause more anxiety. Now, luckily on this podcast, we just so happen to have an absolute exercise expert. And let's talk about the benefits of exercise and how it can possibly combat alcohol.
Well, I think, when you're talking about the benefits of exercise and alcohol, you have to look at them independently and from kind of a multifaceted view. I'm not sure of that Harvard study, but I'm not sure that people who exercise drink more. In fact, I think it might actually be a little bit less because more healthy people that are exercising tend to be a little bit more conscious about their alcohol consumption, particularly if they're trying to exercise in order to maintain body composition. That is true that probably some exercise to counter their alcohol consumption, which, we got to exercise to burn off some of those calories. But the idea in that study, I think, was that there are benefits of to alcohol alone in terms of the cardiorespiratory response. You can get those obviously through exercise as well. And so there are benefits in terms of lowering blood pressure, kind of relaxing the heart rate and doing some of those kind of things that are similar to what we get in exercise. But if we drink moderately and we exercise moderately, we get a kind of a combined effect of those benefits. Now, looking at alcohol, though, in the big picture, alcohol has calories. And, so if you're thinking you're just going to skip the gym and just have a glass of wine, and there were some articles a year or two ago that, some of the media outlets were taking some of these studies and kind of misconstruing them a little bit and basically saying that an hour or a glass of wine is equivalent to an hour at the gym, I think it was what it was. And it's like, well, what a load of crock that is, because yes, you may get certain similar physiological responses, but you're adding calories into the diet that you're burning when you exercise. And so you're adding calories rather than diminishing calories. So you're actually going against maintaining a healthier body composition. And so probably moderation in both of those is going to be important. And in regards to the risks and how exercise can combat that, I think obviously exercise is going to help to minimize the weight gains that you might see. It's going to improve circulation. It's going to have a little bit better effect on liver function so that the liver can actually process more effectively the alcohols and remove them from the body. You're also altering some of the other hormonal imbalances. And so obviously exercise should be the priority. And if you're going to consume alcohol, then it should be something that is done much more in moderation.
Okay, so you had mentioned calories, the extra calories that are taken in while consuming alcohol. And I know that we've discussed this in a past podcast, but can you kind of go over the macros with alcohol and how that can become a challenge for someone who is trying to hit their fitness goals? Obviously, we know that we can use carbohydrates, protein, and fats as an energy source, but what benefit would it be to consuming that calorie of alcohol?
Well, from a macro standpoint, absolutely none. The macros, when you hear people talking about macros, and that's kind of a popular thing now in the fitness industry, is counting my macros, right? When we're talking macros, we're talking protein, carbohydrates, and fats. Alcohol is not a macro because it has no nutrient value to it. And so its only benefit is that it adds calories and, those minor little health benefits that we might have talked about. And so in general, we want to avoid alcohol consumption and the calories that come from them, or at least moderately consume alcohol so that the calories are not going to offset our normal caloric needs. Because a lot of times people are talking in regards to counting their macros, but they don't include alcohol, and that begins, it totally offsets their diet plan. Alcohol has, I believe, what is it? I'm challenging my nutrition lecturing capabilities right now, but I believe it's like 12 kilocalories per gram, I believe is what it is. I might be wrong on that. I do know that fat is 9 kilocalories per gram, and both protein and carbohydrates are going to be 4 per gram. And so obviously fat has a lot more capacity to carry energy to fuel our body, but the way the body is, the way it metabolizes energy and produces the energy, the adenosine triphosphate that we need for muscle contraction, is much more favors carbohydrate metabolism. We can store glycogen in the muscle, so that makes us have more energy for muscular contraction, more immediate energy to be able to perform physical work. Alcohol is not stored in the muscle. It is actually kind of removed from the body through the liver over time. That's why we talk about you should only have one drink per hour if you're going to be driving, because the more drinks you consume in a short period of time, the more that alcohol is building up in the bloodstream and not being able to be removed by the liver. But the liver then is going to convert that into carbohydrates and fats. And obviously it's far less efficient to get our carbohydrates and fats from alcohol. And so carbohydrates are our most important energy nutrient, or macro. Fats should be a bit more in moderation, and there are healthy fats that we should be consuming. We should be consuming, avocado, olive oil, coconut oil, better fats and more natural fats, not processed fats, not, a lot of just vegetable oil and that kind of stuff, or worse, heavy meat fats, very saturated fats. Proteins should not be considered for energy usage. They are predominantly for building muscle, building tissue, and so it should be a priority amongst our macros, because we want to have enough protein to be able to maintain our muscle at the very least, to be able to build more muscle, so that, that's why we lift weights and why we exercise, and also to be able to maintain many of the body functions and enzymes and things like that require proteins. And so protein should be about 1 gram per kilogram or per pound of body weight, as kind of a good baseline. You can adjust from there depending on your level of activity. If you're exercising very intensely, then go ahead and increase the protein a little bit, because some of that might get used as energy. But carbohydrates then should be our next priority. We should never be looking at getting our calories from alcohol. In fact, we should be looking to minimize that. And there's better choices that we can make in our alcohol consumption to make sure that we are not adding excessive macros, your carbohydrates or fats to it. And I personally, kind of avoid the mixed drinks for the most part, where they have a lot of other stuff added into them, because it's just more and more calories. I think the more frilly little things they put floating on top of the drink, the worse the drink is probably going to be. I saw one trainer once basically working with a client, basically said, the hard alcohol, tequila, is one of the better ways to go. But you also want to water down that alcohol as much as possible, so that socially, if you're drinking, you're going to be able to extend the period of time over which you're consuming that alcohol. Years ago, probably more in my college days, I used to favor Captain Morgan spiced rum and Diet Coke.
Nope.
And, not that I, really wanted to get drunk off of it or do any of that kind of stuff, but you're in a social setting. There's always that pressure to have a drink in your hand. And so you could, a splash of that, you had a little bit of a taste of it, and you had, the perception that you were socializing and drinking, but the calories were minimal. And you could nurse on that for a long period of time. Whereas, if you're doing shots, you're consuming a lot of alcohol very quickly. Not good for the liver, definitely not good for the waistline. If you're consuming wine and beer, those also, depending on the rate at which you're consuming them, those calories can start to add up. And, recommendations that I have generally had for beer is to look for the beers that have the lowest alcohol content and the better flavor. There are a number of years ago, I determined that I had to lose some weight. And my wife came home from grocery shopping with a 6-pack of, I don't know if I should mention the brand of the beer, but it was a very low-calorie beer, general type of beer, just the off-the-shelf kind of stuff that everybody drinks and they think it's really good for the waistline. And, it's one of those, like 98 calorie beers. And it tasted horrible. It was like water.
Mm-hmm.
We're living in Portland where you have some of the best beer in the country, but I had probably been drinking, not that I, would drink a lot, but you have, a beer, two, a day, or, even just a few beers over the course of the week. Those calories are all adding up. And so we started looking at, well, what are the calories in beer? And we realized that drinking a lot of like the IPAs, particularly like Imperial IPAs and stuff, had a ton of calories in them. There was one beer we came across, it was a Nuclear Penguin something or other, that had over 1,000 calories in a pint. And you imagine, a lot of people, it looks good, tastes good, I'm just going to drink this. And they realize they have a couple pints, and they're getting so much alcohol that they're getting a little tipsy. But second, they're also consuming a significant amount of calories that they're not aware of. And they're eating food along with that, and they wonder why they're getting fat.
Body's not even able to process any of those calories because it's prioritizing the alcohol to bring it down.
And, so it just has a very negative effect on body composition health. But so we started looking at, well, what are some of the beers that we like? Oh, well, that's got, X number of calories in it. And started doing the math and realized that in a 12-ounce bottle of beer, if you look at the alcohol by volume, the percent ABV that's labeled on almost all beers, it was 30 kilocalories per ABV. So, if you're drinking a beer that has 7% alcohol, then you're looking at 210 calories in a 12-ounce bottle. And it took me a while doing the math in my head, converting from 12 ounces to 16 ounces because, most places you go, you're getting a pint. And I kind of kicked myself for the amount of mathematics I had to do, not realizing that all I had to do was shift that constant from 30 kilocalories to 40 kilocalories when you're dealing with a pint. And so, if you're drinking pints, it's 40 kilocalories per ABV. But it's an easy gauge because if you are out and you're looking at your beer selection, if you're going to have a beer, one ABV in a pint is 40 kilocalories. And if you do the math and add that up over the course of a year, that's a lot of calories, adds up to a lot of body fat that could potentially be gained or lost if you kind of cut those numbers. And so we started looking at, well, okay, how do we get down to those lower numbers without it tasting like the crap beer that my wife had brought home? And we realized that, 4.5 to 5.5 was, in the current market at that time was probably some of the best tasting and moderately caloric beers that we could consume. And so, we started to go out, what's the ABVs? It's style of beer, and then the next question is, what are the ABVs? And, that helped us to begin to really look at kind of cutting some of the calories. And in that span of time, there's been a lot of changes in the craft beer industry where you see things like fractional IPAs, and there's other ones where they're able to limit the carbs in it and can actually bring the calories down to about 100 kilocalories. There's a lot of really good tasting beers out there that are now about 100 calories and are probably in the neighborhood of about 4 to 4.5% alcohol. And so you're able to limit your alcohol consumption. You can enjoy beer if you enjoy beer, and you can really limit the calories. So a lot of it is kind of the choices that you're going to make in terms of what you're trying to consume. But alcohol of itself is a very poor choice for calories for the body. If you're looking at, gaining weight, if you want to gain body fat, then it's going to be a pretty good choice to gain that. There's going to be health impacts that go along with that. And you should not, unless you are really, really under percent body fat, not be looking at just gaining body fat. If we're looking at gaining muscle, for the reasons that you talked about, the hormonal changes and things like that. It's going to make it more difficult to gain skeletal muscle if you are consuming alcohol. And so best to avoid alcohol altogether. If you're going to consume infrequently and when consumed in moderation, and looking at making the choices that are going to reduce the alcohol consumption rather than elevating it, reducing the calories rather than elevating them. And I think that hopefully answers that question.
Yeah, no,
probably went off a little bit of a tangent.
No, definitely, but you covered a lot. You did mention how the macro of proteins are obviously, everyone knows this, proteins are the building blocks of life. You definitely need to take in enough protein in order to build or pack on that muscle, especially if that is one of your goals or just overall health in life in general. With all the research that I was doing regarding alcohol consumption, the number one thing across the board was alcohol actually can hinder that protein synthesis of us being able to break down protein. So let's say we go to the gym and we work out really hard, and then afterwards it's like, hey, you want to go grab a pint? Did we just eliminate everything that we just did in the gym?
I wouldn't say you've eliminated everything. But you have worked against yourself a little bit. But again, if it's in moderation, it's probably not going to have a huge negative impact there. If you're a bodybuilder and your primary goal is to generate as much increase in muscle mass as possible, then yeah, you've probably worked against yourself quite a bit. But if you're an athlete and you're training hard and you just kind of enjoy that beer and you're not doing it to get hammered or anything like that, it's just the taste, the refreshment of it, and to a certain extent, the relaxing effects of the alcohol can have a positive benefit in there. One positive with alcohol consumption, particularly like beer, is that it has a much more rapid hydration rate post-exercise than just water. So for a quick hydration, beer, I should say beer rather than alcohol, because again, a couple of shots is not going to hydrate you. But,
right.
A beer after a hard, sweaty workout is going to replenish your fluid stores very rapidly. Now, it does have a bit of a diuretic effect, so beyond that, it may not be as beneficial, but for immediate hydration, it's actually very good.
Now, why do you think that is? Because obviously there is a diuretic aspect with alcohol, but for beer in particular, is it because it's got a higher amount of carbohydrates that are in it? Or
that's probably a part of it. Again, it's kind of out of my current information base, so to speak. But I remember years ago when I first got out of my PhD and I was job hunting, I actually interviewed at a school, and one of the faculty members had been doing a lot of research in terms of this hydration. So it's been around a while. It just hasn't been on my radar as much until you just kind of posed the question. But my guess would be that it is the carbohydrates. The carbohydrates are going to tend to carry water with them. And so when you are depleted post-exercise, you have available carbohydrate, you have the fluid, you have the insulin spike that comes with, the insulin sensitivity that comes with post-exercise, and it's going to very quickly get that fluid into the skeletal muscle. But again, the continued consumption of alcohol is ultimately going to have a bit more of a dehydrating effect. So there's a really rapid diminishing return that comes along with it. So if anybody's listening and thinking, well, I just worked out and I did a really hard, sweaty workout, I can drink a 6-pack of beer and get myself really hydrated. Nope. That's not going to be very wise. I mean, we're talking really that one beer, and this is why, for many of us, we go out and you're doing a lot of hard yard work or, some hard labor, and you've just been sweating, depleting your calories, and it's a hot day and you go in and you pop that cold beer and you drink it. That's why it's so refreshing, is because your body is perceiving that hydration that it's going to provide for you. I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
Well, I guess kind of one of the reasons why I asked is, one, back when I was personal training, and I would be training and we do these really, really intense HIIT classes or a tread and shed class. Right afterwards, there were a lot of individuals like, let's go down to the local pub right down the street. Let's go grab some. You want to come? And I was like, no, I don't. You guys want to? I feel like everything you just did, it's fine. We're just going to have a couple. I also remember specifically we were putting on a fundraiser and we were running laps around the track where us and our partner, we would hand the baton off until each one of us had ran 10 miles each. And afterwards, with that particular fundraiser was also happened to be sponsored by one of the local growler houses. And everyone went and they were all drinking beer. And I just remember specifically being like, I feel like this is a complete waste of like everything we just did. It counterbalances, or it counteracts it, I should say, not counterbalance. Also, with all the research that I've done prior to this podcast, to me, it just feels like when alcohol goes into the liver is prioritizing it. And then when it prioritizes it, I feel like the rest of the nutrients that need to be pushed out throughout the entire body, we're not getting the proper nutrition because our body, in the blood, because the body's breaking down the alcohol, it's prioritizing it. And so for me, if the liver's in overdrive, not only is it not breaking down the nutrients that we need, but it's also not going to break down like vitamin D, which I don't remember which study I read, but they claim that vitamin D is the mother of most hormones that we need in order to have, build muscles. Some of the benefits, though, of red wine that I was reading, specifically from the University of Alberta, was that it had resveratrol. Resveratrol was actually in that study determined to be an antioxidant, which was demonstrated to improve heart function and heart functionality. And I kind of want to bring that up because you did kind of scratch the surface a bit of some people. They are going to listen to this, or they are going to read that, or they're going to be like, you know what? I don't really want to go to the gym today. I don't want to go on a hike. I don't want to do that. In fact, it's a beautiful sunny day. Let's go wine tasting. It's the same thing. It's good for my heart, but it's really not. There was another study that was actually...
Wait a minute, before you kind of...
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
So, yes, it's not the same as exercise, but... we also have to be promoting a very well-balanced life.
Correct.
And, there's nothing wrong with going wine tasting and, having that social interaction. So that type of activity, if you enjoy wine and you're not consuming to a huge quantity, and I've my wife and I go wine tasting frequently. There's some really great wineries here. In fact, I think I'm going to make a quick plug for a couple of my favorites. We love Pete's Mountain here in West Lynn, as well as Twill. Those are two of our favorites. So I'm going to give a little plug for them because they're friends and they're really good people, and would like going there. But you obviously don't get a lot of wine in a wine tasting. You're probably getting about the equivalent to about a glass, but you're drinking it over a prolonged period of time because you're sitting relaxed, you're talking. Usually they're coming out and they're telling you a little bit about the wine. You're focused on the flavor of the wine. When people are drinking in unhealthy fashion, it's usually they don't care about the taste of it. They're just downing it. I think you were a college student once.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know to what extent you drank in college, but
too much.
I went to WVU in a time when we were ranked. We're no longer ranked as a top party school in the country because they no longer ranked professionals. But we didn't care what we were drinking. And that's not healthy. And certainly binge drinking is never healthy, even if you're drinking quality alcohol. But when you're enjoying it and it's giving you that emotional and that social response, then that's not necessarily something bad. Now, if you're going to sit down and drink a bottle of wine a night, 2 bottles of wine, now it's starting to get into something that's, rather unhealthy. But in moderation, done in the right way, there's not a bad thing about it. You can't work out all the time.
No.
And again, if we're going to be spiritually, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and socially balanced, then we need to do multiple other activities. And so certainly that should not be in the mind of the individual offsetting that exercise. It should be complementing the other healthy behaviors that they're doing. You should be going to the gym. You should be still doing the hiking, getting out, moving around and stuff like that, but doing more diverse activities. And so it's really a matter of balance. Are you doing the things that are overall making you healthy? And the things that you're doing it for health benefits. Now, there's really 2 approaches you can have to alcohol. There's one is you don't care about the health benefits or detriment to your health in consumption. You're just going to consume alcohol to consume alcohol. You could be consuming alcohol all day. So like you were talking about exercise and then going out after exercise and having a beer. It's probably, not something you should do after every workout, but on occasion, probably not a bad thing. But if you're doing it every day that you go work out, you're really counteracting the benefits that you'd get from that exercise. If you're drinking throughout the day, then probably we're looking at having a alcohol problem that needs to be addressed. If you're drinking like it's water, then there's an issue there, and that's going to certainly have a lot of health detriment to you. But when we balance it with proper healthy behaviors, proper nutrition, proper exercise, proper physical activity, and social gathering, then it's not necessarily a bad thing. Not that I'd be saying that, people who don't drink should start drinking, but I don't think people who drink like that should feel guilty or feel that they're doing something unhealthy. But if you are drinking too much and not with thought and purpose behind it, then you might want to consider your alcohol habits and what can I do to rein these in a little bit better to offset that behavior with healthier behavior.
And I agree with you on that. I think there is definitely benefits of drinking alcohol in a social environment and in being around each other, especially with the example of wine tasting and smelling it and inquiring that taste and going through that process. Same with whiskey tasting too. There is a process. There is a science behind that. It can be educational. It can be fun. It allows you to get out of the house. That was not my intention if I was going down that route. I do think I'm a huge advocate for people getting out and socializing. I think that is one of one of the things in this world that is completely overlooked, and the benefits of having a social circle or a support group or friends or family or whatever the case may be for our mental and emotional health, in certain cases, a spiritual health as well. I was just trying to talk more science, like taking in what we put into our body versus what we're putting out. Yeah. So that was not my intention if it was sounding that way. I do agree with you. I definitely think that we should go through, we should have an outlet, right? But as we've stated a couple times in this particular episode, it's balance. Mm-hmm. It's all about balancing it out.
Yeah, but I mean, back to kind of what you were saying, I do think that the balance needs to be more in favor of the health benefit side of it. I mean, we could take it too far and say that there's a social benefit to alcohol. And so, going to a kegger or, going to a fraternity party and consuming mass amounts of alcohol because you're socializing is okay. It's not. I mean, the socialization should be not around the alcohol, but around the interactions between individuals more so than, just going and getting drunk and not really interacting per se. But, it's okay to have those kind of social events that alcohol might be a little bit at the center of it, like we were saying with wine tasting or whiskey tasting. I'm not at all much of a whiskey drinker.
You're missing out. That's great.
Definitely not missing out. But, when that's not the purpose for the gathering as much as the social interaction is, then that's where we favor the health side over the ill health side of it, in my opinion.
Well, you did bring up something, and it kind of made me start to think. These examples that we're using of those social environments, another key factor that we're kind of just scraping over the surface is the example of going wine tasting or going out to the pub with our friends, maybe watching a sporting event, just having one or two drinks, right? Not getting completely inebriated versus that college kegger frat house party. It all just kind of depends on what environment that you're in as well, right? So if we, if you go out to the bar, me and my friends, we always like, who's going to be the designated driver, right? If we were to do that. I'm sure in college, if you're showing up to a house and you don't know where you're at, you kind of want to know, how am I going to get home? Or, I'm sure some of our female listeners are, am I safe in this environment? Where are my friends? That's something that I hadn't even thought of up until we were in this open discussion about, like, there is a difference between a balance of a social environment versus, am I socializing to the point where I'm losing all ambition and forgetting where I'm at. Mm-hmm. And now I'm putting myself into a dangerous position.
Well, I think in any situation where you're consuming alcohol to the point where you lose any control, that's not healthy. That's not safe. That's not the way to go. But, to go to a party, consume a little bit, moderate amount, so that, you're just enjoying the atmosphere, the people, and, to an extent, the taste of whatever you're consuming, imbibing in, then you're okay. But once you start kind of, like you mentioned, you get there and you don't know where you're at. Well, I was going to joke, if you get there and you don't know where you're at, you've already drank too much and you probably shouldn't have gone in the first place.
Fair.
So.
So you mentioned that there's possibly two types of people when it comes to the consumption of alcohol. Certain individuals that are a little cognitive of what they're drinking, how they're drinking it, and others that are just going to be drinking every single day. And a lot of those particular individuals that are just going to be drinking every single day, whether they're drinking with the intention to get intoxicated or they're drinking because their body is craving it, a lot of that can be chalked up to a genetic aspect. They do say that alcoholism runs within the family. Is there a potential way, and I don't expect you to be an expert on that, is there a potential way to combat that? Or typically, at least with the research that I've done, an individual with an addictive personality who's genetically predisposed of having those that addictive personality and those alcoholism tendencies, they can also transition into, okay, I'm not going to necessarily drink alcohol anymore, but now I'm going to be super workout exercise addict. Is there a transition? And if so, is that healthy?
Yeah, you're definitely getting into the periphery of my, professional experience and training and so on. But you bring up several different factors. I mean, there's a lot of different genetic factors that contribute to somebody's risk of alcoholism. Some of that, I think we often label it as being genetic, but it is probably much more of a, like all medicine, all diseases, there's really a bit more of a, biopsychosocial aspect to it. You might have some genetic predisposition to it, but you also maybe grew up in an environment, you can say, well, yeah, my parents were alcoholics, my grandparents were alcoholics. Well, were they alcoholics from a genetic standpoint, a physiological standpoint, or was it just this passing on of, dysfunction from generation to generation, that your grandparents' alcohol abuse caused your parents to, flee from whatever issues that they might have and start drinking, and then that behavior passing on to you.
Like a nature versus nurture.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things we'll never wholly understand, but I think there's a bit of both in that. We tend to, in my personal opinion, and this is a personal opinion, not a professional opinion, but in my personal opinion, I think we tend to latch on to the genetics of our problems rather than the personal responsibility that we can take for that. And, it's easy to say, well, I'm an alcoholic because I have this genetic predisposition. It's like, no, you're an alcoholic because you drink too much, and you have maybe compulsive behaviors, you have addictive type behaviors, and you are choosing to act on those addictive behaviors with alcohol. But, you just as well could have created an addictive behavior on the exercise side. And so sometimes people that do have those addictive kind of compulsive disorders, if you'd call it that, and again, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm probably maybe not labeling it all correctly, but, they are going to approach the unhealthy side of exercise now and doing too much and everything else. And so we have to kind of look at each situation a bit individually. And always what it's going to ultimately come down to is moderation. And if you do have a problem with it, even if you have a problem with exercising compulsively, there's two forms of kind of anorexia nervosa. There's those that abuse their bodies because they psychologically perceive themselves to be overweight and they don't eat, and they just get worse and worse and worse. You have others with similar disorder that are exercising excessively in order to counteract any perceived weight gain. Neither of those behaviors are necessarily healthy. We probably tend to look at the person who's exercising compulsively and thinking that person is healthy, but so psychologically, socially, they're not healthy, and probably physiologically as well. And so I think it is important that in all situations we look at, the biological side, the physiological side of the issue, looking at the psychological aspects of it, but also the sociological. I mean, our interactions with other people. If you have an alcohol problem, whether it's genetic, whether it is from your upbringing, whatever it might be, you're not best to be hanging out with the guys that want to go to the bar all the time, because it's just going to get you in trouble. It's the same in cigarette smoking. I mean, nobody should be smoking, period. But, if you are an ex-smoker, you don't want to be around cigarette smoke. A, you're still getting it into your lungs. But B, you're getting that nicotine. It's going to prompt that addiction again. And so being balanced and moderate and understanding what our issues are and tending to those is probably the best thing that we could do.
Now, you said this is your personal opinion, but I would actually stand behind you on that. That would be one of my personal opinions too. And I know there's probably going to be a listener that's going to be like, well, they don't know what it's like. I'm overweight and I'm obese and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, or I drink because, it's in my family, or I insert excuse. I didn't hit this deadline at work because it's super stressful and I don't have enough time. At some point, we as individuals have to stop pointing the finger at everything else around us and realize that some of the blame does fall on us. And it's okay that it falls on us, because I kind of have a motto that we don't make mistakes, we make learning opportunities. It's only a mistake if you continuously make the same mistake and never learn from it. But if you learn from it and you can recognize it, this is a problem. I have a problem, especially in the realm of alcoholism for this podcast, but it can be anything, right? It can be eating disorders. It can be time management. It can be whatever the case may be. I have a problem. This is ruining my relationships. This is ruining my friendship. I'm not going to put the blame on anyone else. I have to take ownership. And that kind of stands behind our mission statement of these podcasts, of aging well. It's all about aging and maturing and growing and adding those extra miles onto our life, right? And so it may not be a professional opinion, but a personal opinion is, in this case, I definitely think that some individuals that may be listening to this and may potentially get offended, you know what? Sometimes they need to hear that. They need to have that little like, come on, man, wake up. Stop making excuses. Like at some point, myself included, like my actions that I have done in my life and the negative outcomes on that falls on me. That's not anyone else around me. It's not how I grew up. In the end, it's my life. And in the end, it's their lives. And they will have to take on the responsibility to make that change. I'm not saying it's easy. And I'm not saying they're genetically at a disadvantage. That's all true. But they need to move forward with that. So I would, yeah.
And I think, I forget exactly how you framed it, but I was thinking, that you don't make repeated mistakes. I think the first time you make a mistake, and if you don't learn from it, then you make it again. It's not a mistake, it's a choice. You've made that choice because you've had the consequences from the first time that you've done it. And if you didn't learn from it and you go and do it again, that's a choice. Now, again, like we've been talking about, that is not necessarily an easy thing for many individuals. And I think that's a position that we should take both in the medical profession, doctors, nurses, physician assistants, all that, but also, as exercise scientists and psychologists or whatever field we are in, we have to take that biopsychosocial approach and realize that, it's not solely biological. Somebody has an alcohol issue or they have obesity, and yes, it may be a large part genetic, but that doesn't mean just take a pill and you'll be cured. It means, that we have to make better decisions. We maybe have to make harder decisions than somebody that doesn't have that genetic predisposition. If alcoholism runs in your family and you know that and you take your first drink, well, that's not on your genetics. That's on you for making a bad choice. Does that mean that, just because you made that bad mistake and it maybe begins to snowball into further mistakes that you're a bad person? No, it just means you made a couple stupid mistakes and you might need some help to get out of it. And that's where the correct social environment is going to help people get out of those things. And so, whether we're talking obesity, alcoholism, or whatever other things that we tend to look down on people for, we have to understand where they're coming from and understand that there's difficulty getting out of that circumstance and that they might need help. But, part of that help is going to have to come from within.
Getting back onto the subject of alcohol and exercise, especially capitalizing on what we just discussed on making mistakes, we've all made the mistake of going out or having too much fun at a party and consuming way too much alcohol, and as a side effect, regurgitating because of it. We've also made the mistake in the realm of exercise of not consuming enough water or pushing ourselves beyond our normal limit. Maybe we got shaky, maybe we got fatigued, maybe we were dehydrated, but eventually someone is going to feel the overwhelming feeling of being nauseated during a workout. I know I have on both sides, which is going to kind of segue into the next subject, hangovers.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not seeing quite the leap from throwing up after a workout or after a party to the hangover piece, because I've never had a hangover from working out.
Me neither. And that is.
Is that the point?
That is the point. I have never had a hangover from working out. Period. I have felt a little shaky afterwards because I really pushed myself. But after that 30-minute window, or if I go get food afterwards, I'm fine. In fact, I feel great throughout the entire day. After drinking way too much and pushing myself that way, especially the older that I get, maybe in my 20s I was fine, but the older I got, it's hard. It takes a long time to recover. I really don't see any benefit of pushing yourself to that point of becoming sick while making those mistakes while drinking versus pushing myself in the gym to the point of being nauseated. I see more benefits out of that.
So you're seeing more benefits. So you're seeing more benefits from pushing yourself too hard and exercising to drinking too hard?
I would definitely say there's more benefits there.
It depends again on your goals. I think ultimately it can impede performance, just like drinking too much and not being able to go to the gym the next day. Remember, delayed onset muscle soreness can come from pushing yourself too hard and getting that delayed not delayed, but the immune system response causes you that delayed pain and soreness that could actually prevent you from going into the gym, your next scheduled workout. Although, as you hopefully learned in PhysicX, that the best response to that is to just suck it up and get back in the gym, because you're going to work through that pain. But I wouldn't go as far as to say that training to the point of throwing up in the gym is largely better than drinking to the point of throwing up, because we have to remember too that if we're pushing ourselves too hard, that's generally, you're throwing up. That's your body's sign that you have pushed too hard. Recovery is going to be much greater. And if you need more recovery, that means there's a longer period of time before you can have that next beneficial exercise session. And again, just like I would recommend with alcohol, I would recommend with exercise, moderation so that we can recover faster And the faster we can recover, the more actual training sessions that we can do, and the more gains you're ultimately going to see. So this kind of all or nothing in the gym, push till you throw up, pile of just jello on the floor after a leg workout, that is not necessarily the best way to train. There are a lot of lifters that go that route, and it's like leg day. I don't like the phrase leg day. I think basically people either skip legs or they do legs. When you say skip leg day, if you're only training 1 day a week, well, you better be doing it pretty hard because you're not going to get as much benefit from it. But if you're training so hard that, it's almost impossible to recover from it and you have to take a whole week to train, well, you have that adaptive response, you recover, and then you got like another 4 days before you actually train again. You're not seeing quite the same response as if you can be a little bit smarter in your training and, train just hard enough to stimulate a response, recover quickly, come back, stimulate again, and you're going to see a much more progressive long-term response. And, being 58 now, going on 59, and, you're talking about not being, in your 20s, being able to maybe drink a little bit harder than you can now. It's the same thing with lifting too, that, your body might have been able to take a bit more of that when you were younger. I know in high school, the way we trained, that was always the goal, to try to kind of get your training partner to throw up. But we were training, 3 days a week, full body, high intensity type of training. And, we were 17, 18, you could respond pretty well. You get into your 20s, same kind of thing. But once I started kind of getting into my 30s, 40s, and 50s, you can't train that way because you're more likely to get hurt. You're more likely to impede your performance and your adaptation. And, I find for myself a much more high frequency, more moderate approach to exercise is going to be much better. And I see the same with alcohol. Rather than going out and having, if you're limiting yourself to 7 beers a week, but you're drinking all 7 of them at one time, that's not very smart and it's not very healthy.
No, it's not.
If you're having one a day, it's probably not as bad. Well, it's definitely not as bad. Obviously having fewer than that is even better, but, it's the dose response. It's like how much are you consuming or how much effort are you putting in a small period of time, but then you're, not doing it the rest of the week. There's much more benefit to moderation spread out over a longer period of time than binge consumption or binge exertion.
Couldn't that also come down to the subject of genetics that we were talking about as well? Certain individuals are going to be predisposed to having, really, really spiked liver enzymes while drinking one adult beverage. And then certain individuals can go to the gym for like 35 minutes and they just see results way faster than an individual that is on a very strict regimented diet. Because genetics could come down to that, but it also comes down to taking ownership on what we're doing, like we had talked about.
Yeah, you might have a little bit better capacity to hold your liquor better than somebody else, but that doesn't mean that it is beneficial for you to consume like that. There's a lot of people that, I think can consume a heck of a lot of alcohol and, seem perfectly fine. They can get behind the wheel of a car and drive and everything else without any huge impairment. That's not necessarily good. Obviously everybody's liver works at different rates. So a higher functioning liver is going to be able to process that alcohol a bit more quickly. But, who knows what damage you're doing long term with that. It's any abuse on the liver is not going to be good. And, if you start killing off some of those hepatocytes in your liver, they're replaced with scar tissue, and that's where we ultimately end up with cirrhosis of the liver. So, the liver can restore itself. It's very regenerative up to a point, but once the damage starts multiplying, then it's a lot harder for that liver to recover. And so whether or not you have a genetic predisposition or not, the best is always to treat it gingerly and not overdo it.
Last thing before we end the podcast today, we've talked about balance and in everything in moderation. I know there's going to be certain individuals that do live a very healthy, active lifestyle, but they also like to consume adult beverages as well. And they're probably wondering, how can I consume this? What's the best way for me to break it down and fit it into my workout routine? There was an article that I actually read by a doctor from Oregon State University. This research actually took place in the early 2000s. He actually took some of his grad students who were of age and willing participants, and they ended up consuming adult beverages and to see which exercises could break things down the fastest. Now, in his study, what he had determined during that particular research article was that aerobic activity can really break down alcohol a lot faster. I know me personally, if I become too intoxicated, I like to go on a nice long walk. I do know that in my personal and my professional exercise realm, I think you would agree that resistance training is more beneficial for the overall body. But as far as an individual who's like, well, if let's say I drank too much the night before, how can I get that alcohol out of me as fast as possible? Based off of your knowledge, what would you suggest would be the most beneficial way to take the calories that we just took in via alcohol and try our best to utilize it to break it down?
Well, you're talking a couple of different things there, calories versus the alcohol itself. Obviously, the best way to break it down or get rid of the calories the fastest is to not consume it in the first place. And so, if that's the issue, then deal with it on the front end, because I'm not familiar with the study that you talked about. I'd have to look that up because first of all, to me, on just the surface of it, it sounds pretty irresponsible to get people drunk and then say, go exercise. And I'm not sure if that's exactly what was happening in this study, but, there's no exercise that is beneficial in terms of helping to remove the alcohol faster than not consuming the alcohol in the first place. Now, if you're talking kind of the ill effects of the alcohol, after you have kind of processed it, because the liver is going to do its job. The liver can process. I think it's a serving of alcohol. There's different ways to kind of look at it, and I don't want to, being more of a beer or wine drinker, I'd say a glass of beer or a glass of wine in an hour's time, it removes most of that alcohol. So if you're talking the next day, you've gone to bed for 8 hours. You wake up and you had a couple drinks the night before, that alcohol's through your system. If you had a case of beer the night before, well, the problem isn't what are you doing with that to get rid of it at this point. The problem is that you are drinking way too much alcohol in binge drinking. Probably exercise, no matter what you do, is not going to have a huge effect. If you are exercising while still under the influence, that's just stupid. And even testing that in my regard is kind of silly. If you're consuming alcohol and you have to worry about offsetting the effects, then you need to question what are you doing in terms of the alcohol consumption. And if you are training seriously and you're trying to figure out, well, how do I balance my training around my drinking? You're not training effectively. If we're just talking about how we can better expend those calories, you've had a social event, you've consumed a few more calories than your diet necessarily permits, and you just kind of get back on track. The best way is just get back on track. You shouldn't be using exercise as a means of countering bad behavior. The goal is to just perform overall better behavior. And so you've had a social event, you've had a few drinks, maybe you even got a little too tipsy, and the next day is your workout day. Just get back on a horse, get on your regular training regimen. Again, have a planned training regimen. If we should never be looking at, what am I going to do today? I had a little drink last night, so I think I'm going to do cardio. This is my plan. I got to stick to my plan. It might be a little bit harder because I was stupid last night and I had a few too many beers. So I'm going to have a little bit of a hangover. I'm going to have a bit of a headache doing these squats, but I got to do them. That's in my program. That's the best thing you can do. Now, in terms of helping to metabolize that alcohol, I would agree that an aerobic exercise, a low intensity aerobic exercise, is going to be beneficial because that's going to help to increase blood flow, cardiac output to the liver, and the liver can do its job. But again, the best way is to just prevent it. I would not recommend really heavy lifting while still under the influence, and certainly not, or as well not the day after a really heavy drinking session, because it's going to impair your performance. You might still have to kind of go through the workout, but you're not going to get as much performance out of it. And so my best advice is don't overdo it in the first place.
So in the end, in the summary of everything we discussed, alcohol consumption is a part of our culture. It can be a great stress reliever, or it can be a social opening for us to kind of get the party going. However, with that, all listeners, please drink responsibly if you choose to drink. Also remember some of the risks of consuming alcohol. You don't want to consume too much. Everything is within moderation. Although there are benefits of consuming red wine and getting enough antioxidant throughout the body, nothing competes against a healthy, balanced diet and an exercise program. Keep in mind that alcohol can be a depressant, and always remember that if you are genetically disposed to alcoholism, or it does run in your family, be aware, take ownership on that, and remember, just because you made a mistake, that doesn't make you a mistake. It just means you have the opportunity to have that mistake that you made turn into a learning opportunity. And always remember, age well.
Keep aging well. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast, and until next time, keep aging well.